Captain Elena, Ellie Morales, stood motionless on the tarmac, the blistering Alabama sun reflecting off the windshield of the parked Apache helicopter in front of her. The others had already headed inside for debriefing, but she lingered. She always did. Flying the Apache wasn't just part of her job. It was her identity, her purpose, the thing she'd fought harder for than anything else in her life. But no one ever let her forget. She wasn't supposed to be here. When she first walked into Fort Rucker's Army Aviation School, she knew the odds. The numbers spoke loud. Less than 5% of Apache pilots were women. Fewer still were Latina. And barely any came from dusty border towns in southern New Mexico, where dreams were considered luxuries. Ellie had worked twice as hard for half the credit. She didn't have military lineage or letters of recommendation from generals. She had grit, a community college degree, and 10 years of flying civilian choppers across the desert to pay for night school. On day one of flight school, a tall, smug Texan cadet glanced at her name patch and gave her the nickname that would follow her like a shadow, Crash. It started as a joke. After a minor tail rotor stall during simulator training, the name stuck like glue. Even though it had been a systems glitch, confirmed in writing, the story mutated in whispers. She panicked, froze at the stick, nearly took out the whole damn sim. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter in barracks. Gossip. The nickname was written on locker notes, whispered across tables, and even printed once, anonymously, on a squad t-shirt during teen exercises. Ride or crash. Ellie never fought it. She refused to let the noise get in her cockpit. Instead, she outflew all of them. While others struggled with the terrain reading module, Ellie scored perfect maps from memory. She was the only one to land a simulated Apache during a mock blackout with full wind interference. Her flight instructor, Chief Warrant Officer Barnett, quietly praised her abilities, but never publicly supported her. He believed in her skill, but not in putting a target on his back. Still, it didn't matter how well she performed. The rumors persisted. She was too emotional, too green, too risky in combat conditions. She'll crash under pressure, they'd say in low voices. She's textbook smart, but real-world soft. Only Ellie knew where that calm came from. Not from books or drills or theory, but from the desert. From watching her father patch helicopters for border patrol teams with bare hands and oil-stained shirts. From holding her dying mother's hand in a small-town EIA and not letting a single tear fall. From hours alone, eyes closed, memorizing every control, every warning light, every response sequence like her life depended on it, because someday, someone else's life would. And then came the disaster training drill, a 3-day field operation simulating emergency evac under weather duress. It was supposed to be routine. The terrain was easy, the forecast stable, but during a low-altitude navigation over a forested ridge, one of the top-rated male cadets panicked under simulated engine failure and radio blackout. He clipped a tree with his tail rotor, crashing into a simulated civilian zone and failing the entire unit. It was Ellie who landed her, Apache between power lines and tight wind. It was Ellie who coordinated the extraction plan under time limits. And it was Ellie who brought the scenario back under control. They gave her a silent nod. No one clapped. The nickname didn't vanish. Weeks later, during evaluations, the instructors handed out deployment-ready rankings. Ellie was at the top of the list in skill, but third overall. 2 male pilots with less experience were selected for high-risk overseas assignments. Ellie was assigned stateside. Not yet, they said. We need to see how you handle real stress. She didn't argue. She took the clipboard and signed it. But something inside her hardened. That night, while others celebrated with beers and backslaps, Ellie walked alone to the hangar, and stood by her Apache. She ran her hand along the tail like she was checking a heartbeat. Somewhere deep in her gut, she knew her time was coming. It didn't take long. Just 2 months later, news broke. Hurricane Felix had grown from a Category 1 to a Category 4 monster overnight. Puerto Rico was about to be swallowed. The storm destroyed communications, roads, and power. The Army was mobilizing aviation relief and recon squads. One unit, light, fast, with field extraction capabilities, was being flown in with less than 24 hours' notice. The mission required precision, calm under pressure, and absolute control in violent weather conditions. Ellie was tapped. Not first, not even second. But when the 2 pilots ahead of her reported mechanical flags on their birds, one suspected engine vibration, the other a comms glitch, she got the nod. It wasn't confidence. It was necessity. Her commanding officer met her at the hangar. "You're flying into the storm, Morales," he said, handing her the orders. "They said you'd crash in combat conditions." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe it's time I show them how I fly." Ellie didn't need to look at the mission briefing twice. Her eyes locked on the storm map and never flinched. Hurricane Felix was now classified as a high-end Category 4 and climbing. Satellite footage showed its monstrous eye devouring the southern coast of Puerto Rico. Winds were clocking at 150 miles per hour. Entire towns had disappeared beneath water and mud. Roads? Gone? Communications? Offline. Helicopters would be the only way in or out. It was the perfect storm. And somehow, she was flying straight into it. "This is suicide," her co-pilot muttered under his breath as he packed gear into the Apache's tight cabin. First Lieutenant Brody Keller, tall, buzz-cut, and exactly the type the Army loved to promote, had been assigned to fly with her as mission co-lead. He wasn't thrilled. Neither was she. "This bird wasn't built for hurricanes," he added, louder this time. Ellie paused, glancing at him. "Neither was I," she said, strapping on her harness. The mission was supposed to be simple on paper. Recon in, locate isolated survivors and downed units, drop medical aid, and relay coordinates to base. 2 birds, both Apaches, stripped down, for maximum fuel and flexibility. The second bird, call sign Reaper 2, would follow close behind with medics and extra gear. Ellie would lead, but nothing about Felix was simple. The eye had shifted west faster than predicted, and radar towers were going dark one by one. Still, there were Marines and civilians trapped beyond the mountains. They were low on supplies, some injured, some without food or water for 2 days. Someone had to go. No drones, no satellites. Just 2 machines and a handful of humans. At the briefing, Ellie noticed the hesitation. A room full of pilots, command officers, and engineers, all of them staring just a second too long when her name was read. She could feel it, like static. In the air. "Captain Morales will take Reaper 1, the CO said. One of the old warrant officers leaned into a peer and whispered, just loud enough to carry, "She never hold altitude in those winds." Another chuckled, "They'll be scraping her out of the jungle." Ellie didn't react. She had long since stopped trying to correct people's expectations. Let them doubt her. Let them scoff. She just needed one chance to fly. One chance. To prove she wasn't a mistake in the roster. Inside the hangar, final prep was underway. Engineers checked fuel lines, bolted down weapon systems, and made last-minute calibrations. Ellie's Apache was a beast of steel and willpower, worn from field duty, but reliable. Her hands moved over the controls like a pianist over familiar keys. Lieutenant Keller hovered, double-checking their weather model. "You know we're probably going to lose GPS once we hit the outer band." "I've flown worse," Ellie said, raised an eyebrow. "You ever fly inside a hurricane?" She met his gaze. No, but I've flown inside panic. And I don't break under pressure. He didn't respond. But the silence was loud. The two birds lifted at 0430, just before sunrise. The sky was gray, but calm. The deceptive quiet before chaos. The base was still, and a small crowd of support staff gathered at the edge of the tarmac, watching as the two Apaches lifted into the sky. Reaper 1, this is base. Last chance to turn around. The voice crackled through her cum. Ellie smiled. Faintly. Negative, base. We're committed. Reaper 1 heading to grid Delta 2, Angels 1-5. The wind began picking up as they crossed the coastline. Clouds boiled in the distance like a giant cauldron had cracked the sky open. Felix wasn't just a storm. It was alive, breathing, spinning, pulling everything toward its mouth. As they hit the outer bands, the chopper lurched. Turbulence slammed them sideways. Rain came in sideways sheets, hammering the windshield. Lightning danced like ghosts around them. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Keller cursed, grabbing his harness. This is nuts. Ellie adjusted the pitch, correcting against the crosswind. Keep your eyes on the altimeter and the fuel. I'll keep us in the air. Her voice was steady, surgical, like a scalpel cutting through chaos. Behind them, Reaper 2 struggled to keep pace. Ellie adjusted her speed to keep them in formation. Reaper 2, report position, she radioed. A beat of static. Then, holding 400 meters behind, but it's getting ugly back here. We stay tight, Ellie replied. No one gets left behind. At 600 feet above the jungle, the storm shifted. A new wall of wind punched them hard. Lightning cracked again, so close it lit the cockpit in blue. Instruments blinked in warning. The Apache growled but held steady. Then Keller saw it first, a faint glow from below, flickering in a clearing that shouldn't exist. Captain, he said, pointing. Something's down there. She checked the heat scanner. Multiple signatures. Moving. That's not a fire, it's a flare. Reaper 2 buzzed in. We're reading it too. Looks like a downed unit. Army or National Guard. Ellie didn't hesitate. We're diverting. Command tried to interrupt. Reaper 1, we have no confirmation. She cut them off. We have eyes. We have heat. We have movement. We're going in. Silence followed. And then, copy that, Reaper 1. Good hunting. As they dropped altitude, winds screamed around them, rain slamming the rotors. But Ellie never blinked. Her hands moved with impossible precision, slicing through turbulence with the skill of a surgeon and the heart of a soldier. This was what she was built for, not war games, not flight tests. This, right here, the impossible, the storm, the lives waiting below, and she wasn't leaving anyone behind. The Apache howled as it descended, shuddering beneath the force of a wall of wind that hit like a freight train. Ellie gritted her teeth and fought the cyclic, her gloved hands steady on the controls. Water lashed the canopy like bullets. Below them, the jungle blurred into a mess of motion trees, thrashing, rivers swelling, and a narrow clearing barely wide enough for a landing. This is madness, Keller shouted over the roar. We can't land in this. We don't land, they die, Ellie snapped. She didn't have time for his nerves. Her eyes locked on the flare signal flickering through the storm. It pulsed like a heartbeat, faint but steady. Someone was still down there. Maybe soldiers, maybe civilians. Either way, they weren't walking out of this storm on foot. Reaper 2, we've got visual on a flare. Adjust heading 3 degrees. East and prepare to hold position. I'm dropping into the zone first. Reaper 2's pilot hesitated. You sure you can put it down in that? Watch me. Ellie dropped her altitude to 250 feet, dodging the tree line. The Apache jerked violently as a downdraft hit them. One of the warning lights blinked red brief engine surge. Ellie didn't blink. She compensated manually, balancing throttle against pitch. Her world narrowed into movement, vibration, and instinct. Beside her, Keller clutched the side panel, sweat mixing with rain on his face. "How the hell are you still calm?" "I'm not," she said flatly. "I'm just busy." Suddenly, lightning arced across the sky, lighting up the jungle below like daylight. In that instant, she saw them 6 figures clustered near a shattered black hawk, one waving a flare with their uninjured arm. The bird had gone down hard. Its tail boom was snapped like a twig, and its rotors lay bent and buried under branches. She had seconds to decide. No level ground, no open space. Just mud, debris, and wind determined to kill them. But Ellie had landed. On worse. "Coming in," she radioed. "Reaper 2, stay in a hover until I confirm loadout." "Copy," came the answer. Tense, she brought the Apache down hard and fast, skimming treetops until she found the tightest wedge of open space between a broken tree trunk and a rock outcrop. The tail kicked out slightly, and for a breathless second, the skid touched mud too fast. But she corrected. The bird thudded into the clearing rough, but safe. "Out!" "Move!" she barked. Keller unstrapped and jumped down, motioning to the survivors. They limped forward, soaked and bleeding, clothes shredded by debris. One man had a makeshift tourniquet around his leg. Another was being half carried by his teammate. A woman with a bandaged face gave Ellie a salute as she climbed in. "Didn't think anyone was coming," she said hoarsely. "Neither did they," Ellie muttered, helping her aboard. Suddenly, a sound metal screeching above. Ellie looked up. The wind had shifted again, harder this time. Trees bowed in agony. The rotors groaned. The Apache wasn't going to stay grounded much longer. "All aboard?" she shouted. Keller did a head count. 7 total. "Including us, that's 9. We're overweight." Ellie cursed under her breath. Standard evac limit was 8 souls. On board, 9 pushed them past safety limits, especially in hurricane-force winds. But she wasn't leaving anyone behind. "We'll adjust in the air," she said. Keller stared at her. "You'll never lift off in this." "I don't need you to believe it," she said, switching the rotors into full torque. "I just need you to strap in." Reaper 2 came over the comm, static-filled. Reaper 1 status? "We've got them. Extraction in progress. Prepare to cover our exit." Ellie took a deep breath, eyes scanning the panel. Everything screamed at her. Weight imbalance, low rotor clearance, muddy terrain. Every rule said abort, but heroes didn't live by rules. They made them. She throttled hard. The Apache lifted barely. The skids clawed against the mud, the rotors chewing rain and air. The bird rose 6 feet, then dipped again. A groan echoed from the engine. Her fingers flew across the controls, feathering the collective, adjusting pitch, redistributing power. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "Don't make me push." They surged again. This time, 10 feet. A branch scraped against. The tail boom. Keller winced. Ellie leaned forward, coaxing the machine like it was an old friend. The ground vanished beneath them in stuttering flashes. And then freedom. The jungle dropped away, and the Apache cleared the canopy. Engines howling, carrying all 9 souls into the sky. Reaper 2 whooped over the radio. "You crazy badass woman. I saw that lift hell of a pull." "Stay close," Ellie said. "We're not out yet." The eye of the storm loomed ahead, massive, ominous, whirling like the hand of God. Ellie's flight path would cut straight through the outer ring and into partial calm, but getting there meant threading the needle through wind shears and electromagnetic chaos. Keller exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 10 minutes. I can't believe you pulled that off. Ellie glanced at him, her face soaked but smiling. Next time someone calls me Crash, remind them I don't go down. I bring people home. They pushed forward into the gray wall, one storm-torn. Chopper bearing the weight of 9 lives, slicing through wind and doubt. Ellie had never been more certain. This was her sky now. The wind punched the cockpit as if trying to yank the Apache back to Earth. Rain slashed the windshield sideways, blurring the jungle below into a smeared canvas of green and gray. Ellie kept one hand firm on the cyclic and the other on the throttle, her shoulders tight with concentration. The rotor screamed under strain, but the bird was flying. Just barely. Behind her, the rescued soldiers huddled together, soaked, bruised, and silent. One of them, a young corpsman with a gash across his temple, kept glancing at Ellie like she was a ghost. "You good back there?" She called without turning. "Better than we were on the ground," one of them replied weakly. "Then hang tight. Still a few miles to heaven." Reaper 2, still flying behind them, had kept up through the chaos surprisingly well. Ellie hadn't expected the secondary crew to stick so close in these conditions, but credit where it was due. They weren't turning tail. "This is Reaper 2, the voice crackled over the comms. "We're adjusting position to your 6. A clock 40 meters offset." Ellie replied, "Copy. Maintain distance. I've got unpredictable lift with the weight." But 10 seconds later, the radio went dead. Just like that, silence, no static, no signal. Just emptiness. Ellie frowned and reached for the dial. "Reaper 2, confirm position. Say again." Nothing. She switched frequencies. Tried the emergency channel. No ping, no tone, not even white noise. "Base, this is Reaper 1. We've lost contact with Reaper 2. Request verification on signal tracking. Over." No answer. "Base, confirm last known location of secondary bird. Do you read me?" Still nothing. She glanced sideways. Keller's face was pale in the co-pilot's seat, staring into the swirling storm. "We just lost everything," he said. Heart dropped. The storm had swallowed their signal range. No comms, no radar, no GPS, just the storm, her instruments, and instinct. Her Apache had become the lone pulse in the heart of chaos. Keller leaned forward. "We have to head back." Ellie didn't answer. Her eyes were scanning the terrain below. Her gut told her something was wrong. Reaper 2 hadn't just dropped comms. They'd disappeared off her wing like a light switch. Too fast, too sudden, something had gone wrong. She banked the Apache left. "What are you doing?" Keller demanded. "I'm going back." "You can't just, Ellie. We have 7 people aboard. We're over capacity. We're leaking fuel. If they're down, there's nothing we can." "They're not dead," she snapped. "I'd know." "No? How could you possibly know that?" "Because I was them," she said, tightening. "The Ark. And I remember what it feels like when you're down in a storm and no one comes." The helicopter shuddered as she brought it into a tighter circle, straining to hold elevation. Outside the window, flashes of lightning illuminated. The jungle below in jagged frames, twisting trees, waterlogged terrain, and something else. Movement. Smoke. Ellie's single quotes S eyes sharpened. She flipped the infrared on. A faint cluster of heat signatures pulsed from a clearing 2 clicks south of their original flight path. The shapes weren't consistent with wildlife. They were clustered, uneven. "Human. There," she whispered. "I've got them." Keller leaned toward the screen. "That's 6? Maybe 7? Too close to ignore." "You're pushing it, Morales." Ellie dropped the nose and descended through the next cloud layer. The rain thickened instantly. It was like dropping into another world, louder, darker, closer. The jungle rushed up beneath them. Trees bent sideways from the wind. Water blasted the canopy. Ellie could barely see, but she could feel it. She didn't need perfect vision. She had rhythm. She had memory, and she had rage quiet and focused boiling under her skin. "Talk to me," she said to herself, coaxing the Apache through the last 100 feet. Below, a scene unfolded in eerie slow motion. The second Apache was down. Hard. It had gone nose first into a sloped ravine, and now lay crippled. Tail split and cockpit cracked open like an egg. But it hadn't exploded. That meant one thing. The crew had likely survived the crash. A few figures waved frantically up at her as she hovered above them. Ellie radioed instinctively. Nothing. Their radios were dead. No signals were coming in or out. They were ghosts in a dead zone. "We're going in," she said. Keller whipped around. "You're going to try a second landing? Here? There's a space near the riverbed. If I angle the tail left and balance the load, you are going to kill all of us." Ellie snapped her eyes toward him, fire behind her comb. "No, I'm going to save them. Strap in or get out." He stared at her for a breathless second, then turned back without another word. The rotors screamed as she brought the Apache down. Every system was blinking yellow or red. She adjusted the balance mid-drop, throttling hard, keeping the skid from tipping. The chopper landed hard but clean, just 20 meters from the wreck. Ellie yanked off her harness and jumped out into knee-high. Mud, rain drenched her instantly. She sprinted toward the broken bird, boots slamming through water. 2 crewmen were dragging a third from the third cockpit, his leg clearly broken. A medic had blood on his arms, a radio in his hand, and a look of exhausted disbelief. "You came back," he said. "I'm not in the habit of leaving people behind." More figures stumbled out. One woman was limping badly, arm slung in a makeshift sling. Another had wrapped a head wound in a torn flight jacket. Ellie turned. "All of you, move. We're light on time and heavy on risk." They scrambled toward the Apache. One by one, the dead crew rejoined the living. Keller helped them aboard, silent now, eyes wide. The bird sagged under the weight, and Ellie knew this second takeoff would be even harder than the first. They were soaked, exhausted, overloaded, no comms, no guidance, but they had her God, and that was going to be enough. The rain had turned to needles, slicing sideways through the clearing like shards of glass. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the jungle to its roots. The Apache sat squat and heavy in the sloped riverbed clearing, its rotors drooping slightly. Under the weight of a dozen exhausted, injured bodies. Ellie was still outside, ankle-deep in mud, making sure the last 2 survivors from Reaper 2 were hauled in. One of them was barely conscious, slumped over the shoulder of a flight medic. The other clutched a busted radio and shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "I thought we were gone," he muttered. "You're not," Ellie said. "Not today." She didn't have time to think, only calculate. They had 11 souls on board now, including herself and Keller. The Apache's max capacity in these conditions was maybe 7, 8, if they stripped it down. 11 was suicide on paper, but this wasn't paper. This was now or never. She climbed back into the cockpit, slamming the door shut as water dripped from her helmet and gloves. Keller looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Ellie, we're too heavy." "I know. You don't understand. This won't fly." I ran the numbers in my head. "I don't care about the numbers," she said, firing up the engine. "We fly or we die." Keller stared at her. Then, after a second, strapped in and took a breath like it might be his last. Ellie started cycling the power. The Apache groaned under the weight, its rotor blades turning slowly, straining against gravity and storm. Alarms were already blinking. Tail rotor torque warning. Engine load at 92%. Lifting in a muddy clearing was bad enough, doing it overloaded in a hurricane was nearly impossible. Nearly. "Everyone hold on," Ellie shouted into the cabin. "We're going up, and it's going to get loud." The rotor pitch increased. Water and debris whipped in wild spirals around the clearing. The bird trembled, skids rattling against the soft earth. The engine whined, struggling to lift. The front skid rose, then slammed back down. "Too heavy." Keller looked at her, voice shaking. "It's not going to work." Ellie stared straight ahead. "You're wrong." She adjusted the cyclic, feathered the blades just a hair sharper, redistributed power from auxiliary to main lift. Then she throttled harder than she ever had in her life. The bird screamed, and then it moved, first a foot, then another. The rear skid lifted, the whole frame swaying dangerously. Trees bent around them, but the rotors cleared. Slowly, painfully. The Apache rose from the mud. It wasn't flying. Not really. It was clawing its way out of gravity's grip. Keller let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You're actually doing it." Ellie didn't respond. Every ounce of her concentration was on the pitch, the balance, the sound of the blades listening for the first sign of failure. But the Apache held. They cleared the treetops by inches, rotors slicing rain like blades. A branch snapped against. A tail boom. A loud crack. Warning lights blinked, but she ignored them. The trees fell away below them. The clearing vanished. They were airborne, just barely. Behind them, the passengers stared in stunned silence. One of the injured soldiers whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. Ellie didn't care what they said, as long as they stayed seated. "We're out," she said, her voice low and flat. "Stay with me, everyone. We've got 20 minutes of fuel and a whole lot of storm between us and the base." "Base still isn't answering," Keller said, scanning the comms. "Signal's jammed. They'll hear us when we get closer." "What if they don't?" "Then we keep flying until they do." The clouds ahead boiled like smoke. Flashes of lightning danced inside them, sometimes close enough to light the entire cockpit. The turbulence increased, sharp dips, hard kicks. But the bird stayed in the air. Ellie kept it level by instinct. No GPS, no terrain scanner. Just old school. Flying, dead reckoning, and gut. She adjusted their heading, aiming for the center of the storm's eye, just past the worst of the bands. If she could get them into the calmer zone, they have a straight shot back to the forward airstrip. If the Apache could hold together that long. "Fuel down to 22%, Keller said quietly. "That's pushing it." Ellie nodded. "We knew it would be." Below them, the jungle stretched endlessly, trees swaying like dancers, rivers swollen and black. Somewhere in the distance, a transformer exploded in a flash of blue light. And then, like stepping through a curtain, everything changed. They passed into the edge of the eye. The wind dropped. The rain slowed to a whisper. The sky opened up into a strange, glowing dome of quiet, eerie, and surreal. Everyone on board seemed to exhale at once. Keller leaned back, letting out a breath. "It's beautiful." Ellie didn't smile. She knew what came after the eye. They had 5, maybe 10 minutes before the other side of the storm slammed into them. "We've got a window," she said. "I'm taking it." The Apache surged forward, cutting through the temporary stillness like a missile. The rotors hummed low and fast. The passengers were silent, now each locked in their own thoughts, too tired to speak, too grateful to interrupt the woman who just pulled them from hell. Ellie stared ahead, eyes sharp, lips pressed tight. She was soaked, shaking, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever felt. But she was flying, and she was bringing them home. The storm rolled across the coast like a freight train of fury, smashing palm trees and flattening villages. At the forward operating base near San Juan, Sandbags buckled and generators rattled under the weight of the wind. Inside the control tower, red lights blinked across radar screens, and static choked every communication line. Captain Wesley Rhodes, the senior air controller on duty, wiped sweat from his brow and stared at the blank radar sector in grid Delta 2. Reaper 1. And Reaper 2 had gone dark over 45 minutes ago. No ping, no transponder, no signal, just silence. A younger technician tapped the console. Still nothing. I've cycled the receiver 5 times. Rhodes exhaled through his nose, jaw tight. Keep scanning. They might be flying blind. Their GPS probably got fried. A major leaned against the doorframe. We need to face facts, Wes. The storm swallowed them. No bird flies through Felix's inner bands and comes out whole. Rhodes didn't respond. He remembered Morales from her first day on base. She was the youngest Apache pilot in the squadron. Clean boots, quiet confidence. Took notes when others cracked jokes. Didn't laugh much, but when she did, it was a quick, sharp thing. Controlled, like everything else about her. And now she was out there, somewhere in the belly of the beast. They'd lost good men before. Crashes, engine failures, mechanical faults, but something about Morales going missing twisted Rhodes' gut. She wasn't supposed to be another name etched into the memorial wall. Another technician spoke up. Sir, I'm rerouting our backup signal through the SATCOM loop. We might get a bounce. Do it, Rhodes said. The room was quiet, but tension was thick. No one wanted to say it out loud. Both Reapers were likely down. Maybe they didn't burn. Maybe they just vanished under the canopy. Another tragic dot on a storm map. Then dash suddenly, a soft beep. A tiny green dot blinked on the edge of the screen. Rhodes leaned forward. Confirm that. He barked. Could be a drift signal. Wait. There's another. 2 both pings. I've got altitude readings. Everyone surged toward the monitor. Heading 298. Altitude 900 feet. Signals erratic, but consistent. Rhodes's voice sharpened. Put it on audio. See if they're broadcasting. Crackling, static. Then, beneath the distortion, a voice emerged, shaky but familiar. 7 souls on board. Bird is heavy. Tell them to clear the damn pad. The room exploded in motion. Holy, that's Morales. The tech shouted. Rhodes grabbed mic. Adrenaline surging. Reaper 1, this is forward control. We read you. Pad is cleared. Wind vectors 220 at 34 knots. Visibility dropping. More. Static. Then. Copy that. Coming in fast. Outside, ground crews scrambled. Emergency responders were dispatched. A medevac team ran across the tarmac in raincoats, stretchers in hand. In the sky, through a swirling cauldron of wind and rain. The silhouette of an Apache emerged, battered, swaying, its rotors straining like wings ripped from an angel. And still, it flew. Rhodes ran outside as the bird approached. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Even mechanics in hangars turned to watch. Ellie Morales was flying through a hurricane. The tower crackled again. Base. Be advised, no tail assist. Controls are stiff. I'm going in hot. The Apache dipped low over the runway, barely, clearing the airstrip lights. It hovered unevenly, fighting gusts like a boxer taking punches and refusing to fall. She's not going to make it. Someone muttered. But Rhodes smiled. Yes, she is. Ellie's hands trembled on the controls. Her vision blurred with rain and exhaustion. Every bone in her body ached. The bird was trying to fall out from under her, but she refused to let it. You stay with me, girl, she muttered. 1 more minute. In the co-pilot seat, Keller had gone completely silent. His fingers gripped the panel as he watched the ground race up beneath them. Ellie angled the nose down, took a deep breath, and committed. The Apache dropped too fast. For a breathless second, it looked like she was going to overshoot. But she flared just before impact, kicking the tail sideways, landing hard. The entire bird slammed into the tarmac. The left skid cracked what it held. The rotors began winding down. They had made it. Ground crews sprinted toward the aircraft. The hatch burst open, and medics began pulling out the wounded. 2 were unconscious. 1 had a fractured rib. Another was wrapped in gauze and still clutching a flare. Keller climbed down next, almost collapsing from adrenaline. And Ellie stepped. Out-soaked, helmet off, hair plastered to her face. She looked less like a pilot and more like something dragged out of war. And yet, she stood straight, calm, steady. Rhodes walked up, water pouring from his cap. You disobeyed 3 protocols. You violated extraction parameters. You risked your aircraft. Ellie nodded. Anything else? He stared at her. Then smiled. You brought them all back. Ellie didn't reply. She didn't have to. Behind her, the wounded were being rushed to med bays. The surviving crew from Reaper 2 looked at her like she'd been pulled from legend. Not a pilot, not a soldier. A miracle in a flight suit. Keller approached, helmet in his hands. He still couldn't believe it. You flew us through hell, he said, and you didn't flinch once. Ellie looked at him, voice dry. I flinched. I just didn't stop. And with that, she turned toward the hangar, limping slightly as the adrenaline faded. The storm behind her still raged, but she had already won. The rain had begun to slow, but the storm still hovered like a predator, its claws stretching over the base. The Apache now sat battered and steaming on the tarmac, rotors still twitching as if trying to spin again. Crew members swarmed it, mouths agape at the wrecked yet airborne miracle. Ellie Morales had somehow landed. Inside the hangar, the medics worked fast, patching up the rescued soldiers. Fractures, dislocations, a mild concussion, brutal but survivable. And thanks to Ellie, they'd all made it back. Ellie herself sat on a metal bench in the corner, stripped of her flight gear, wearing only a drenched olive t-shirt and pants torn at the knees. Her boots were caked in mud. Her hands were still, trembling, tiny, involuntary aftershocks from the storm inside her. Across from her, Keller leaned back on a stretcher, his head bandaged, arms folded. He was staring at her like she was some myth torn out of a war ballad. You didn't land that bird? He said finally. Ellie didn't look up. No? You wrestled it out of death's jaws. She gave a half smile. I'll settle for. Landed. A sudden roar of applause interrupted them. They turned. Rhodes stood in the center of the hangar, flanked by base personnel, mechanics, medics, flight crews. All clapping, some whistling. A few even tearing up. Ellie stood awkwardly, unsure what to do. Rhodes raised a hand. Captain Morales, he said, voice raised over the noise. You've just pulled off the kind of mission they write books about. You broke regs, overloaded your bird, defied 2 orders, and flew blind into a hurricane. The clapping quieted slightly. And I'd have court-martialed you. He grinned. If you hadn't saved everyone doing it. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Then, louder applause. Ellie flushed, uncomfortable in the spotlight. She didn't want this. She wasn't flying for praise. She did it because no one else would. Because someone had to. Rhodes stepped forward, eyes more serious now. What you did today wasn't just skill. It was grit, judgment, pure guts. You gave those soldiers a second life. Ellie glanced at the stretchers, where 2 rescued crewmen gave her tired thumbs ups. Keller leaned in and whispered, You know they're going to give you a medal for this, right? She shrugged. They can give it to the bird. She took all the hits. He chuckled, shaking his head. Rhodes cleared his throat again. You need rest. But the Pentagon's already calling. They want to debrief within 48 hours. Your name's getting passed around in high places. Ellie nodded, her eyes distant. I'll be ready. But what she didn't say, what she didn't need to say, was that she wasn't sure she'd ever fly the same again. The storm had carved something out of her, left something else behind. Not fear, but a weight. Responsibility. Maybe later that night, she lay alone in her bunk, the storm still growling outside. She stared at the ceiling, hearing echoes of the rotor blades, feeling again the jolt of the skid hitting the clearing, the tremble of the overloaded engine. She hadn't cried. Not once. Not when she'd thought they were going down. Not even when she saw the other berg wrecked in the trees. But now, in the dark, with the base quiet and the chaos gone, a single tear slipped down her cheek, not because she was afraid, because she'd done it. She had brought them all home. The next morning a light knock at the door jolted her from sleep. It was Keller, looking far too clean and smug for someone who'd nearly died 12 hours ago. You've got a visitor, he said. Ellie groaned. Tell them I'm unconscious. Too late. General Whitaker just landed. She blinked. From D.C.? Personally, he's here for you. She rolled out of bed with a sigh. This is going to be awkward. 10 minutes later, she stood in the officers' hall, dressed in fresh fatigues, hair damp, fatigue bags still. Under her eyes, General Whitaker was tall, silver-haired, with an expression carved from marble. His uniform bore enough decorations to start a museum exhibit. Captain Morales, he said, shaking her hand firmly. You made a mess of the rule book. Yes, sir. You put a heavily damaged aircraft into unstable airspace. Yes, sir. You brought home every last soldier under your watch. She looked him in the eye. Yes, sir. He studied her for a beat, then broke into a rare smile. I've seen a lot of pilots in my career, brave ones, brilliant ones, but few who knew when to ignore the rules for the sake of the mission. Ellie didn't answer. I've already spoken with Central Command, he continued. You're being considered for the Distinguished Flying Cross, and more than that, we want you to help redesign rapid response flight training. Her eyes widened. Me? You've earned it. He turned, paused, and looked back. Your instincts saved lives. But it wasn't just instinct. It was heart. As he walked away, Keller sidled up next to her. They're calling you the Storm Witch now, he whispered. She chuckled. Better than Crash. Much better. And though Ellie Morales didn't care much for titles, medals, or headlines, in that moment standing in the aftermath of the storm, she felt something settle inside her. She hadn't just flown through the hurricane, she'd conquered it. 2 weeks after Hurricane Felix tore across the Caribbean, the skies over the San Juan forward base had returned to peace. Blue stretched from horizon to horizon. The wind carried salt, not chaos. The palms had stopped trembling, but inside the hangar, Ellie Morales stared at the Apache she had flown through hell. The aircraft was grounded indefinitely, cordoned off with yellow tape like a crime scene. Its left skid had collapsed inward. The tail rotor housing was warped. Bullet holes, yes. Real bullet holes pocked the fuselage, from where local looters had opened fire before she lifted off. But it stood. Morales ran a hand gently along the Apache's side, her fingers catching on the scarred metal. She felt the machine's silence, like a heartbeat that had finally rested. She hadn't flown since that night. Everyone said she deserved a break. Medals were being processed. The Pentagon sent flowers. A journalist from Stars and Stripes left 10 voicemails. But none of it mattered. Not to her, because every time she closed her eyes, she still saw the jungle canopy spinning toward her. Heard the metallic scream of an engine pushed past sanity. Heard Keller muttering prayers beside her as the storm shoved them sideways. A shadow fell over her. You talk to her often? Keller asked. Ellie didn't turn. Every day. He smirked, then leaned against the maintenance rail. His bandages were gone now, leaving only a faded bruise at his temple. They're assigning you to Joint Base Lewis McChord, he said after a moment. 2 months. Advanced command training? Ellie nodded. She already knew. They want me to help rewrite the rules, she said. They should let you burn the old book. Keller replied. Silence stretched between them. The wind hummed. She's not flying again, Ellie said, voice soft. Too much structural damage. Keller studied the bird. Then she gets to rest, same as you. Ellie finally looked at him. You think I should stop flying? He shook his head. I think you should fly when you're ready, not before. She appreciated that. Keller always understood the unspoken things. But, he added with a crooked grin, when you do go up again, I'm calling shotgun. A rare smile crossed Ellie's face. You're the worst co-pilot I've ever had, and still alive, which is a miracle considering I was. With you? They both laughed real laughter, not the exhausted kind. The kind that sounded like healing. 3 months later, Washington State. Rain here wasn't wild like in San Juan. It was soft, steady, more a whisper than a scream. Ellie stood on the edge of a runway at Lewis McChord, dressed in her flight suit, her name freshly stitched above the U.S. Army patch. Behind her, rows of cadets waited beside a Black Hawk. Today was their final simulation run. She was their instructor now. None of them knew the full story, not really. They'd read the headlines, seen the blurry photo of the storm-wrecked Apache. Some called her Storm Witch behind her back, thinking she didn't know. She didn't mind. Names came and went. What mattered was what she could pass on. You've got 5 minutes to prepare your evac scenario, she called out. You'll be flying into a simulated blackout zone with wounded on board. No GPS, no comms. Your only map is what you can remember. One cadet raised a hand nervously. Ma'am, what if the storm makes it impossible to land? Ellie didn't hesitate. Then you fly lower. You find a way. That's what pilots do. The group scrambled to prep. Behind her. Keller approached. He wore civilian clothes. Now medical leave had turned into full transition. He was moving back to Colorado to start flight therapy for veterans. You sure about this? He asked her. Ellie nodded. This is where I belong. You still get the shakes? Sometimes? You still see the jungle? She didn't answer for a moment. Then, yes. Keller didn't press. Instead, he held out a small black patch. It was embroidered with 2 crossed rotors, a lightning bolt, and her call sign, Reaper 1. They made it for you, he said. Ellie took the patch slowly, running her thumb across the threads. The moment was quiet. Then she looked up. I'm flying again next week, she said. First solo since the storm. Keller grinned. The sky won't know what hit it. As he walked away, Ellie turned to face the horizon. Above her, the clouds were clearing. The sun broke through warm. Honest. She thought back to that night. Keller's bleeding temple, the Apache groaning under stress, the jungle falling away beneath them, the storm clawing at her every second, and the moment she knew they were going to make it, not because she was perfect, but because she refused to stop. Because even when the sky fell apart, she had held on. And now, as she watched her cadets lift off into that same sky, Ellie Morales understood something. The storm didn't define her. The choice to fly through it did. The end.